Welcome to the deep dive. Forget the bake sales, the constant appeals. Today we're going straight to the core of sustainable mission funding by exploring this idea of a generosity engine. It's really about moving beyond just asking for money to building genuine spiritual partnerships.
Right. It's a different mindset entirely.
Imagine giving that fuels not only the missions work, but also, well, the giver's own spiritual journey. That leads to lasting impact. That's kind of the unseen fruit we're talking about.
And what's fascinating is this fundamental shift, isn't it? We're looking at funding not just as like a means to an end, but as a vital part of the mission itself. Ministries face real hurdles today. I mean, digital fatigue is real, global uncertainties. It can make traditional asks feel a bit distant,
Definitely.
But within these challenges, there's this huge opportunity tapping into a deep well of generosity, one that's rooted in spiritual connection and a shared belief in, well, God's abundance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our focus today is really, how do ministries shift from those one-off transactions to cultivating a truly transformative environment of generosity, a real generosity engine? We've got some great material looking at both the strategic clarity needed and the spiritual principles behind how this actually works.
Yeah, it's that blend.
It's about moving away from that scarcity mindset, that feeling of never quite having enough. Right?
Always chasing the next dollar.
Towards a sovereignty mindset, trusting deeply in God as the ultimate giver. Think of it this way. Maybe sustainable funding isn't a problem we need to solve with like a new campaign, but a core principle to unlock.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really challenges a core assumption, doesn't it? That feeling that we're solely responsible for conjuring up the needed resources.
Right, the pressure's all on us.
Exactly. And that pressure can lead to burnout. But a sovereignty mindset, it recognizes God's active plan, inviting us to align with his provision.
So it's not about abandoning strategy.
No, not at all. It's about reframing our efforts, moving from, anxious scrambling to confident stewardship.
Okay, let's lay some groundwork then. The biblical foundations of generosity. Our sources point us right back to Genesis, this idea that we are created in the image of a generous God. What's the key insight there?
Well, what's fascinating here is the idea of generosity being like built into our very nature. Think of God creating light before the sun. It's a gift given not out of need, but simply because of who he is. So being made in his image suggests we have this inherent desire to give something that goes beyond just, getting something back. It's about a generosity that flows from our core, sort of mirroring our creators.
And this isn't just a New Testament thing, right? Our sources get into covenantal provision in the Old Testament, starting with Abraham's tithe, Genesis 14. This was way before any formal tithing laws. What's crucial about that early example?
Well, this raises a key point about the nature of giving, doesn't it? Abraham's tithe, it feels less like a requirement.
Yeah, less like an obligation.
Exactly, more like a natural act of worship, an acknowledgement that everything he had ultimately came from God. It really sets a foundation that generosity is a fundamental response to God's goodness, recognizing his ultimate authority over everything.
We also see generosity kind of built into the system in the Old Testament with the gleaning laws. Leviticus, Deuteronomy. This wasn't just random kindness, was it? It felt structured.
Exactly. If we connect this to the generosity engine idea, the gleaning laws show God embedding generosity right into their society, right into their economy.
Wow.
It wasn't just, leaving a few scraps out of pity. It was a systematic way to care for the poor. A kind of built-in engine of generosity.
Okay, moving to the New Testament. Jesus presents what our sources call a radical model. The widow's mite in Mark 12 is such a powerful example. What makes her tiny offering so significant?
What's fascinating is how Jesus just flips our understanding of value.
Yeah.
Her gift wasn't big in monetary terms, obviously, but it cost her everything.
Yeah.
All she had. The key insight here is that true generosity is measured by sacrifice what we give in relation to what we have, not just the sheer amount. It's a really profound redefinition of meaningful giving.
And then there's the parable of the talents, Matthew 25. How does this fit into the idea of a generosity engine? What's the core principle there?
Well, this raises a key question about stewardship, doesn't it? The parable shows that the resources we're given, they aren't meant to be just kept safe and buried.
Right.
They're meant to be invested for God's purposes. The crucial principle is multiplicative stewardship. Faithfully using what we have to generate growth and greater impact for God's kingdom. It's about active investment, not passive holding.
Got it. Finally, our sources look at the early church as a generosity prototype, especially in Acts. What can we learn from their example about creating a sustainable engine of generosity?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the early church's model was just rooted in unity and genuine care for one another. Deep care.
Sounds powerful.
It was. Their sharing wasn't some forced policy. It was a natural outpouring of their changed hearts. And this created such a vibrant community, a living engine of generosity that met needs and attracted others. It really fueled their rapid growth.
And then there's the Macedonian church in 2 Corinthians. Their situation was very different, wasn't it? What's the powerful lesson from them?
Oh, what's truly remarkable about the Macedonians is their giving beyond their means, despite facing real hardship, even persecution.
Wow. Beyond their means.
Yeah. Their generosity wasn't driven by wealth or surplus. It was driven by this overwhelming sense of God's grace and a deep, deep joy in participating. Their example powerfully shows that the fuel for a generosity engine isn't necessarily, financial abundance,
Right.
but a heart transformed by grace.
Okay, so from these biblical foundations, our sources outline some key principles of a generosity engine. Let's walk through them. First, source-centered. What's the core idea here?
This principle really just highlights the fundamental truth. God is the ultimate source of everything.
Simple but crucial.
Crucial. It's a reminder to shift our focus from relying solely on human efforts, the next fundraising campaign, and to recognize that true, lasting generosity flows from Him.
Next up is vision-driven. How does a compelling mission vision actually drive generosity? What's the key?
Well, a clear and inspiring mission vision connects with people's hearts. It turns them from just observers.
Spectators.
Exactly. Spectators into active participants, stakeholders. When people understand and really believe in the why behind the ministry, they're far more likely to invest their resources, time, talent, treasure to make that vision a reality.
So the connection to purpose is key.
Absolutely.
Then there's trust-fueled. What role does faith play in this engine? Why is it so important?
Trust in God's provision is, it's absolutely vital. Doubt can really block the flow of generosity. When leaders operate in faith and consistently point to God as the provider, it creates this atmosphere of trust within the whole community, encouraging greater giving. Faith creates the right environment.
Okay, another principle is reciprocity of grace. Now that sounds a bit like a transaction, but our sources say it's different. How so? What's the distinction?
Yeah, it's crucial to distinguish this. It's not about giving to get something specific back in a direct transactional way.
Okay.
Instead, reciprocity of grace reflects God's giving nature. Our generosity is a response to His grace, and as we give, we often experience further blessings, maybe spiritual, maybe relational, just as a natural result of God's abundance flowing. It's a reflection, not a transaction.
Got it. We also have multiplicative stewardship. We touched on this with the talents parable. As a principle of the engine, what's the main point?
This principle emphasizes that even small acts of generosity, when they're used wisely and strategically for God's purposes, can lead to surprising and significant results.
The leverage.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with what we have and looking for opportunities to maximize its impact for God's glory. Small investments, potentially big returns for the kingdom.
Community infused is another key principle. Why is the community aspect so important for a thriving generosity engine?
Because generosity isn't meant to be a solo act, right? It thrives in a community where giving and receiving stories are shared, where there are collective rhythms of generosity. This shared experience creates a sense of ownership and encourages much more participation than just individual isolated acts. It's about shared stories, not isolated transactions.
Makes sense. And finally, transparent accountability. Why is openness so essential for a strong generosity engine?
Well, transparency in how gifts are used, it just builds trust. Simple as that.
Right.
When givers clearly see the impact of their contributions and they witness responsible stewardship, it fosters greater confidence, and that encourages deeper, more sustained involvement in the mission. Openness breeds trust.
Okay, so those are the principles. Our sources then detail the anatomy of the generosity engine, outlining stages. First is inspiration. What happens at this stage? What's the goal?
Inspiration is all about casting a compelling vision, using vivid storytelling to connect with people's hearts, getting them to resonate deeply with the mission's core purpose.
Like Jesus' parables.
Exactly. Relatable stories with profound meaning. The goal here is to move people emotionally and spiritually, linking their hearts to the ministry's heartbeat.
Next is ignition. How do we move from that inspiring vision to actual generosity? What's a crucial step?
Ignition is where that inspiration sparks a personal response. It's inviting people to take an active step of faith, often through prayerful giving.
Ah, the invitation.
Yes. Remember the Macedonians begging to give, even in poverty. That shows this powerful desire to participate when their hearts are genuinely ignited by the vision. The crucial step is that personal invitation to act.
Following ignition is investment.
Yeah.
What's the focus here? Where should the resources go?
Investment is about strategically deploying the resources that have been given, focusing on the areas that will have the highest impact in fulfilling the mission.
High impact avenues.
Right, like in the parable of the talents, resources are meant to be used wisely and intentionally to generate the greatest kingdom return.
The fourth stage is multiplication. What does this look like in the context of a generosity engine? What's the outcome we're looking for?
Multiplication is where we see the fruit of the investment, the transformed lives, the tangible outcomes that result from the generosity.
Stories.
Yes, and sharing these testimonies of impact then fuels the engine's momentum, inspiring further generosity. Think of the early church's growth. That was a clear outcome of God's work among them, right? The outcome is momentum through stories.
And the final stage is reinvestment. How does this keep the engine going and expanding?
Reinvestment is about cycling resources, both financial and the lessons learned, back into new initiatives, further expanding the mission's reach. Like Paul's collection for Jerusalem supported the wider church, this stage ensures the engine continues to fuel ongoing and new kingdom efforts. It's about continuous expansion and learning.
Our sources share some compelling stories from the engine room. One is a church in Manila. What did they do differently that saw such a significant impact?
What's key here is their intentional shift. They moved away from sort of guilt-based appeals to sharing powerful stories of transformation, a child being fed, a clinic opening, a student getting trained.
Real, man.
Real impact stories. And they coupled that with regular vision casting and small group prayer focused specifically on the mission, the result. A 60% increase in giving in just 2 years.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah, funding both existing projects and launching new church plants. It just shows the power of narrative combined with prayer.
Another story is from a marketplace movement in Singapore.
Yeah.
How did they cultivate generosity in a, well, non-traditional church setting?
They empowered entrepreneurs to see their businesses not just as profit centers, but as mission outposts.
Interesting twist.
Yeah. Focusing on ethical practices, community reinvestment, employee discipleship, they created the sustainable funding stream directed towards church planting in unreached areas. It really highlights how these generosity engine principles can apply way beyond traditional church walls.
Okay, so for listeners wanting to build their own generosity engine, what are some key practical steps from our sources? Let's get down to some actionables.
Okay, first, definitely cast a captivating vision. Use multimedia videos, infographics, personal stories, whatever connects emotionally and intellectually with the mission.
And keep it fresh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Keep it fresh, revisit, and renew the vision regularly. Don't let it get stale.
What's another actionable step?
Equip generosity champions. This means maybe forming a stewardship team, training them in biblical giving, budgeting, communication. Also, developing small group materials on generosity. Integrate it right into discipleship, not as a separate thing.
Building systematic rhythm seems crucial for long-term health.
Yeah.
What does that look like practically?
Yeah, make giving easy and consistent. Offer recurring online giving options. That's pretty standard now, but essential.
Right.
Also, intentionally celebrate Generosity Sundays, maybe, with testimonies and updates to reinforce the importance and the impact of giving. Make it part of the rhythm.
Transparency and celebration seem linked. Why are both so important, practically speaking?
Well, foster transparency and celebration builds trust and reinforces positive behaviors. It's key.
How?
Publish regular impact reports, but focus on stories, not just numbers. Host testimonial nights. They create connection and shared purpose between givers and recipients. People see the why.
Prayer seems foundational throughout this. As a practical step, how can ministries intentionally integrate prayer into their resourcing?
Good question. Pray and prophesy over resources. Encourage intercession teams to pray specifically for provision and wise stewardship. Prophetic vision casting can also inspire people to give beyond their perceived capacity, trusting in God's abundance. It connects faith to finances.
And finally, measure, learn, and adapt is highlighted. What specific things should ministries be tracking here?
Track giving trends, sure, but also project return on investment. Are resources having impact? Track engagement metrics. And importantly, hold regular debriefs. Celebrate successes, learn from shortfalls, and adjust strategies to make sure the generosity engine stays effective and aligned with God's provision. Constant tuning.
Okay, beyond the practical, our sources explore the theological bedrock, emphasizing God as provider and strategist. This sounds like it goes beyond just seeing him as a source of funds. What's the deeper understanding?
Exactly. It's about recognizing God as the master planner, intentionally orchestrating circumstances. Our role becomes aligning with his strategies, not just implementing our own.
So he's proactive, not just reactive.
Precisely. He's not just reacting to our needs, he's often pre-planning the provision. It's a much bigger view.
Our sources also discuss Imago Dei and the gift of stewardship. How does our being made in God's image connect with funding ministry in a meaningful way?
Well, being made in God's image means we inherit his capacity to create, but also the responsibility to care for what we're given.
Stewardship.
Right. Recognizing that all our resources ultimately come from God's generosity transforms funding ministry. It stops being just a transaction and becomes an act of worship, honoring him with what's already his.
And the idea of divine providence as strategy is really intriguing. It suggests it's not just luck when unexpected provision appears, is it?
Absolutely not luck. Divine providence is God intentionally working out his plans. Unexpected provision, like a surprise donation or an unlikely partnership, these are glimpses of his strategic hand at work.
Ah.
Recognizing this shifts us from a mindset of chance or desperation to confident expectation in his purposeful provision.
To illustrate this, our sources offer biblical case studies of divine funding strategies, starting with Moses and the manna multiplier. What principles emerge from that story about God's provision?
What's really key there is the daily rhythm God established, daily dependence on him. And that double portion before the Sabbath, teaching that honoring rest actually leads to abundance. These rhythms, daily trust and Sabbath overflow, are a powerful model for a divine funding cadence.
Another powerful case is Elijah's widow and the endless jar. What core lessons does that story offer for how God provides?
Oh, that story beautifully shows that provision often starts when we act in faith, even in apparent lack.
Taking that first step.
Yes, and the ongoing miracle of the flour and oil demonstrates God's ability to sustain provision long-term, often from very small beginnings. It highlights the power of obedient sacrifice.
Then there's Nehemiah's walls and the generosity surge.
Yeah.
What was significant about his approach to funding that massive rebuilding project?
Nehemiah was just excellent at casting a clear, compelling vision, and crucially, inviting everyone to participate.
Shared ownership.
Exactly. This created a sense of shared ownership, making the mission everyone's. People volunteered time and resources with incredible zeal, showing the power of a clear invitation to drive investment and engagement.
Okay, from these case studies, our sources distill core principles of divine funding strategies. Vision-centered is one. How does it specifically apply to divine funding?
It reinforces that God's funding often begins with a clear, compelling vision, one that resonates deeply and moves people to action. The vision provides the why behind the giving, aligning hearts with God's purposes.
Faith-fueled action is another principle. How does it go beyond just having a vision? What's the active component?
This principle emphasizes that provision often requires a proactive step of faith-giving or acting, even when it seems impossible or illogical.
Like the widow.
Exactly. The widow giving her last meal perfectly illustrates this act of trust. It's not just belief, it's belief in action.
Rhythmic dependence links back to the manna story. What's the importance of rhythm in divine provision?
It underscores the value of integrating consistent seasons, sowing, harvesting, rest, overflow into our financial practices, mirroring God's pattern of provision in creation and with the Israelites. It's about establishing a sustainable rhythm of reliance on him.
Community activation reminds us we're not alone in this. How does engaging the community impact divine funding strategies?
It highlights the power of involving the entire body of Christ as co-laborers, not just passive donors.
Right, everyone plays a part.
Yes. When everyone participates in stewardship, it creates a stronger, more resilient engine of provision, just like the early church sharing their resources.
Strategic multiplication echoes the parable of the talents again. What's the key idea for maximizing impact?
It's about intentionally investing resources into high-impact initiatives, those that have the potential for significant kingdom returns. It's not just giving, but giving with a strategic focus for maximum impact.
And the final principle is kingdom first. What's the priority we should have in our funding strategies?
This principle emphasizes prioritizing God's agenda above our own. trusting that as we seek his kingdom and righteousness first, he will indeed provide our needs, as promised right there in Matthew 6.33. It reorders our priorities.
Okay, shifting to practical steps for implementing divine strategies. One idea is to craft a kingdom vision story. What makes a story compelling in this context? What should it do?
A compelling kingdom vision story frames the ministry's mission as part of God's larger redemptive story. It invites the giver to be a key participant in that story.
Make it personal.
Yes, and use sensory details, sights, sounds, feelings, make the story vivid, emotionally resonant, connect hearts to the mission.
Establishing rhythmic giving pathways is another practical step. What are some concrete examples of this? How does this look?
Well, this could involve encouraging daily remembrance through, say, micro-giving reflections linked to small, regular donations, maybe an app or something simple. It could also include Sabbath overflow events like focused generosity retreats or special offerings designed to inspire more significant giving at specific times, building in those rhythms.
How can ministries effectively activate their community in these strategies? What are some practical ways to engage people beyond just asking for money?
Good point. Activate community-centered campaigns by maybe creating peer-led huddles, small groups studying generosity and praying for provision together.
Okay.
Also, invite people to use their specific skills to support the ministry through skill-based sponsorships. Not just cash, but talent, too.
Leveraging strategic multiplication sounds like a smart way to make the most of limited resources. How can ministries practically do this?
One way is test batch funding. Allocate small seed funding to new projects, track the outcomes carefully, and then scale up the ones that prove successful.
Learn as you go.
Exactly. And regularly share impact showcases. Use data and stories to show donors the tangible results of their investment. Show the multiplication.
Finally, cultivating a culture of trust and transparency is crucial. What are some specific actions ministries can take to build that trust?
Practice open book governance, publish detailed budgets, maybe host Q&A sessions. Be upfront.
Okay.
Also, provide prophetic encouragement. Pair financial reports with stories of God's unexpected provisions, highlighting his faithfulness alongside the numbers.
Our sources share more illustrative stories of divine strategies in action, including a church plant in the Philippines.
Right.
What was your innovative approach?
Facing really limited resources, they shifted. They created this simple but powerful video showcasing their impact.
Okay.
Then they invited people to adopt a plank for a small donation, like 500 PHP. The personal connection, amplified through social media, led to the whole building being funded by both local and overseas believers. A true partnership in provision.
Wow, adopt a plank. That's tangible.
Very tangible. Another example is the Marketplace Mission Hub in Bengaluru. How did they implement these divine strategies in a business context?
Right, outside the church.
Yeah, they created a Kingdom Ventures Fund where Christian entrepreneurs committed a percentage of their profits. This pool of resources then provided small grants and mentorship to mission initiatives, helping them become self-sustaining businesses that both served their communities and shared the gospel. Business as mission funding mission.
Measuring the effectiveness of this engine is important, you mentioned. What metrics that matter should ministries be tracking to see if it's actually working?
Well, God's full impact is often immeasurable, right? But practically, track the participation rate, what percentage of your community is giving, the recurrence ratio, how many are repeat givers.
Okay.
Also, impact leverage, like the ratio of seed funding to outcomes, and maybe a vision retention index. How well is the vision actually understood and remembered? And review these regularly in prayerful leadership gatherings, not just as cold data.
Ultimately, cultivating these divine funding strategies leads to broader implications beyond just the finances. What are some of those wider impacts for the kingdom?
Well, it deepens discipleship, for one. Generosity shapes character. It strengthens community bonds through shared giving. It amplifies the church's witness through joyful generosity, not begrudging duty. And it fosters innovation as faith replaces the fear of scarcity. It really transforms more than just budgets. It transforms people and culture.
Moving on, our sources discuss shifting from sand foundations to solid rock in ministry funding. What are the hallmarks of a sand foundation approach that we should be trying to move away from?
A sand foundation often relies on those isolated transactional appeals focused only on immediate needs.
Crisis funding.
Yeah, crisis funding. This model is really vulnerable to economic shifts, external pressures, and it can lead to vision fatigue as the same urgent appeals lose impact over time. It lacks the deep roots of a faith-based approach.
So to build on solid rock, Our sources emphasize rediscovering God's character as provider, referencing scriptures like Genesis 22.1, whole, the Lord will provide, Philippians 4.1, high, my God shall supply all your needs, and 2 Corinthians 9, sowing generously, reaping generously. What's the core truth we need to grasp here?
The core truth is really to recenter our understanding of provision squarely on God's nature, his character as the ultimate faithful source. These scriptures remind us of God's promise to provide, to meet all our needs according to his riches, and that generosity isn't just giving away, it's a spiritual investment with a generous return. This theological foundation shifts our entire approach from anxiety to confident expectation in God's character.
The imagery of manna in the wilderness is revisited as a rhythmic provision system. What are the modern implications of this daily dependence and Sabbath abundance for our ministries today? How can we apply that?
Well, modern applications could involve shifting from infrequent, large appeals to more consistent, maybe even daily, giving reminders or prompts for prayer and gratitude regarding provision.
Micro-giving, maybe?
Could be micro-giving or just micro-reminders of dependence. It also highlights the importance of communal prayer for daily needs and celebrating Sabbath abundance through intentional overflow giving periods or seasons of focused generosity. It's about fostering constant reliance on God, not just occasional panic.
The partnership of Elijah and the widow offers powerful lessons on provision. What's the key takeaway for ministries today seeking that solid foundation?
The takeaway is perhaps to consider partnering with those who may seem to have limited resources, the widows, in our context.
Interesting.
The widow's faith, her small act of obedience, unlocked sustained provision. Ministries can similarly invite sacrificial trust, even from those with little, and often find unexpected streams of support opening up through that kind of partnership and prayer. Don't overlook the widow's mite.
From these insights, our sources outline principles of a faith-funded foundation. What are some key principles for building on this solid rock?
Okay, key principles include having a pre-provision vision, casting it clearly before asking for funds, practicing rhythmic dependence through consistent prayer and giving patterns, inviting sacrificial partnership, which can trigger God's multiplying grace, fostering communal ownership by engaging the whole community in stewardship, ensuring transparent stewardship through open communication, and measuring success based on kingdom ROI, focusing on lives, change, not just dollars raised.
Turning to practical steps for building on this rock foundation, what are some actionable ideas ministries could try?
Well, consider hosting vision immersion events, maybe retreats or special gatherings for deeper engagement with the ministry's story and God's promises.
Get people bought in.
Exactly. Implement micro-giving rhythms to encourage consistent small acts of generosity and dependence, create faith step challenges to encourage sacrificial giving, and then share the impact stories that result.
What else?
Establish transparency portals, online maybe, for real-time updates on giving and impact, and form synergistic partnerships with other like-minded organizations for shared resources and witness. Collaborate, don't compete.
Ultimately, a funding approach rooted in these divine strategies leads to beyond budgets, kingdom-shaping outcomes. What are some of those broader impacts of building on a solid rock foundation?
It fosters greater ministry resilience, definitely. Enabling the work to endure economic shifts or unforeseen challenges, it deepens spiritual formation as both givers and leaders grow in trusting God more fully. And it strengthens cultural impact because a church or ministry known for unwavering faith in God's provision stands as a powerful witness in a world often driven by fear and scarcity.
Okay, our deep dive continues by exploring seeing provision through God's eyes, starting with the foundational truth of ownership and source. This emphasizes a crucial shift in perspective about who really owns what, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a fundamental shift. Moving from the idea that we need to generate resources to understanding that everything already belongs to God.
Psalm 24.1.
Exactly. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Deeply grasping this reframes ministry funding entirely. It becomes stewarding what is already His, and provision itself becomes an expression of His abundant love and care.
We revisit some biblical case studies with this specific lens. Starting with manna in the wilderness, what new insights emerge when we consider God's ultimate ownership and provision in that story?
It really highlights God's intentionality in establishing that rhythmic dependence, teaching them daily trust in His provision, not their own ability to store or hoard. The Sabbath overflow further underscores His abundant nature, that He provides enough even for rest. A modern parallel could be small, recurring gifts or prayers for daily needs, combined with intentional Sabbath-giving drives for surplus, all while recognizing his ultimate ownership.
The story of ravens feeding Elijah takes on new meaning when we consider God's unconventional methods through this lens. What blueprint principles does it reveal about how God provides?
It shows that provision can come through completely unexpected channels. Ravens aren't exactly delivery services, right?
Not usually.
But they faithfully deliver day after day, building Elijah's trust in God's ongoing, sometimes surprising care. This should inspire ministries to be open to unconventional partnerships and giving streams, trusting God works outside the usual boxes.
The widow's flour and oil story continues to resonate with the theme of God's provision. What does it tell us about the relationship between faith and sustained supply, especially when we see God as the owner?
It powerfully illustrates that giving from a place of perceived lack, that act of faith and obedience with what little she thought she owned, can unlock God's multiplication and lead to a sustained supply from his abundance.
Sustained.
Yes, it's a reminder that miracles of provision can be ongoing, not just isolated events, when we operate in faith, stewarding what he provides.
And the feeding of the 5,000, when viewed through the lens of God's provision and ownership, highlights what key principles about God's resources and our role in them.
It showcases the power of blessing what little we perceive we have, acknowledging it comes from him, the importance of distributing resources through the community he uses people, and the miraculous multiplication that can occur when we trust God with what we offer up.
And the leftovers.
And the abundance of leftovers. It just points to God's overflowing generosity and our role in stewarding even the surplus wisely.
Okay, from these case studies, our sources reiterate key principles of the divine blueprint. Sovereign ownership is central. How does deeply understanding this one principle change our approach to ministry funding?
It fundamentally shifts our mindset. From acting as owners, trying to accumulate, to acting as stewards, responsibly managing what belongs to God. This fosters greater accountability, less anxiety, and a different perspective on how we use the resources entrusted to us. It changes everything.
Rhythmic dependence, faith-fueled action, unconventional channels, bless, break, distribute, multiplicative stewardship, and transparent celebration are also highlighted.
How do these collectively inform a ministry's blueprint for provision? What kind of culture do they create together?
Together, they create this holistic culture, one of consistent reliance on God, proactive faith even when it's hard, openness to unexpected help, intentional sharing and blessing of resources, a focus on maximum kingdom impact, and open communication about God's faithfulness.
It sounds like a culture of trust.
It is a culture of trust and abundance rooted in God's design, not human striving.
The human-divine partnership is emphasized again. God's provision often involves our action. What's the practical implication for how ministry should operate day to day? It means that while we deeply depend on God, prayer is foundational. He often works through us. Our hands, our feet, our plans.
Okay.
So ministries need to pair prayerful surrender with clear calls to action, inviting their teams and communities to actively participate, gather the manna, bake the bread, distribute the loaves, trusting that God will multiply their efforts and his provision. It's a call to both prayer and work.
Our sources then offer practical steps for building your ministry's blueprint, like casting a fullness vision, designing rhythmic trust exercises, identifying unconventional channels, activating bless, break, distribute rituals, and celebrating multiplication publicly. These seem like concrete ways to live out these principles, right?
Exactly. These are actionable strategies, ways to embed the divine blueprint into the daily life and culture of a ministry, moving beyond just theory to practical application. They encourage a proactive and faith-filled approach to resourcing God's work.
Ultimately, aligning with God's blueprint for provision leads to broader implications, like deeper discipleship, resilient ministries, a compelling witness, and accelerated innovation. It sounds like a much more sustainable and, frankly, more impactful way to operate.
It really does. When ministries operate from this understanding of God's ownership and trust in his ways of providing, it fosters deeper faith in everyone involved. It creates organizations that are more adaptable and enduring. It strengthens their witness to the world. And it unleashes greater creativity in fulfilling their mission because they're not constrained by perceived lack.
Our deep dive concludes by exploring the profound concept of moving from a single drop to an ocean of impact, emphasizing the theology underlying the ripple. This speaks to the far-reaching consequences of holistic support, doesn't it?
It really does. It underscores the truth that financial provision, when viewed through a kingdom lens, isn't just about meeting immediate needs. It frees individuals and ministries to fulfill their greater God-given purpose.
Purpose beyond budget lines.
Exactly. Generous communities reflect God's heart, becoming a powerful witness. And the legacy of faith, including generosity, gets passed down through generations through sacrificial giving.
Hmm.
It's about recognizing the exponential impact of even a single act of generosity.
Our sources revisit biblical case studies of rippling provision, such as the Philippian partnership with Paul and Barnabas' generosity in Acts. What do these stories illustrate about the lasting impact of giving beyond the immediate need?
Well, the Philippian church's repeated gifts didn't just support Paul's ministry in the short term, covering his rent or food. They enabled him to write foundational letters that continue to shape and impact the church across centuries. That's a massive ripple.
Huge.
And Barnabas's act of selling his field provided crucial immediate support for the needy, yes, but it also set this powerful example of sacrifice that inspired the whole early church. It fostered an environment where the Holy Spirit could work powerfully. The impact went far beyond the cash value.
What are the mechanisms of the ripple effect at different levels? How does generosity create lasting impact on, say, missionaries, church culture, community witness, and even next-generation mobilization?
Okay, so at the missionary level, financial freedom allows for greater focus, less stress, more effectiveness in ministry.
Makes sense.
In churches, celebrating generosity cultivates a culture of compassion, unity, and outward focus, shifting away from internal concerns. In communities, acts of sacrificial giving become powerful, tangible testimonies to God's love and power.
And for the next generation.
By witnessing generosity, by being involved, the next generation is inspired to embrace a kingdom-focused worldview. They learn to become generous givers and senders themselves, continuing the ripple.
What are some practical strategies to multiply the ripple of generosity within a ministry? How can we be intentional about this?
This could include creating holistic funding partnerships, churches supporting missionaries not just financially but prayerfully, relationally for the long term, holding vision casting celebrations that highlight the ripple effect, inspiring greater giving, implementing family generosity apprenticeships to instill giving habits and a kingdom mindset early on.
What else? Digital tools, maybe.
Yeah, maybe using digital ripple trackers, simple ways to show the ongoing downstream impact of giving, and providing mentorship for future senders to actively equip the next generation in biblical generosity and mission support.
This understanding of the ripple effect has real-world relevance in various contexts, right?
Yeah.
Leading to greater donor retention in nonprofits, increased volunteer engagement in churches, maybe even improved employee morale in businesses aligned with mission.
Exactly. When organizations, whether churches, nonprofits, or even businesses, understand and leverage the ripple effect of generosity, it creates a much more sustainable and impactful ecosystem. It fosters deeper commitment and a greater sense of shared purpose across all levels of engagement. People want to be part of something that multiplies.
Ultimately, understanding and embracing the theology of the ripple effect helps us see that even a single act of generosity, offered in faith and with vision, can have an ocean of impact, extending far beyond what we can immediately see and touching countless lives for the kingdom.
Precisely. It reframes our understanding of giving. It's not just a one-time transaction to meet a need. It's an investment in eternity, a stone cast into the water that creates these ever-widening circles of transformation for God's glory.
That concludes our deep dive into cultivating a generosity engine for sustainable mission funding. We've covered a lot: the biblical foundations, key principles, practical steps, and this profound ripple effect of moving beyond transactions to true spiritual partnership.
Yeah, and what's really clear, I think, is that funding isn't just a logistical hurdle to overcome. It's actually a vital proving ground for our faith.
A proving ground.
It's an opportunity to trust deeply in God's provision, to align our strategies with His divine blueprint for abundance, knowing that even small acts of faith can create that ocean of impact we talked about.
So as you, our listener, consider all we've discussed today, maybe ask yourself, what could be achieved in your ministry, in your context, if it truly operated from a place of God-sized provision, fueled by a thriving generosity engine that creates a ripple of impact? And maybe more pointedly, what is one intentional step, however small, you can take this week to begin moving towards that reality? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.